What kind of show creates villains that you actively root for? I mean, think about that for a second. What kind of show builds its entire comedic engine around characters who are scheming, manipulating, threatening, and failing, and somehow makes every single one of them more interesting than 90% of the heroes on television? Because that is exactly what SpongeBob SquarePants did. And I don't think enough people talk about how wild that is. Tonight, we're going through every villain this show ever created. Every schemer, every ghost pirate, every con artist, every bully, every supervillain, every one-off antagonist that showed up for 11 minutes and left a permanent mark on your brain. We're talking about Plankton, obviously, but also Man Ray and the Dirty Bubble and Doodle Bob and the Flying Dutchman and Dennis and Bubble Bass and Squilliam Fancyson and Flats the Flounder and the Tattletale Strangler and every other character in this show who exists to make life harder for the people of Bikini Bottom. And my argument, the thing I want to convince you of by the end of this, is that every single one of them is brilliant. Not just funny, not just entertaining, brilliant. Because Stephen Hillenberg and his writers understood something about villainy that most shows never figure out. The best villains aren't the ones who are scary. They're the ones who reveal something true about the world they live in. So if you're watching this late at night, get comfortable. This one is going to take a while. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these for you. Just a quick tap, and you're in. Now let me tell you why the bad guys of Bikini Bottom might be the most carefully crafted antagonists in the history of animated television. The place I want to start is the place you'd expect me to start, but I promise you, we're going somewhere you don't expect with it. We need to talk about Sheldon J. Plankton. And look, I know, everyone talks about Plankton. He's the main villain of the show. He's been around since Season 1, Episode 3B, which aired on July 31st, 1999. Literally the third episode of the entire series. But here's the thing that I think people miss, and it's been eating at me for a while now. Plankton was never supposed to last. Mr. Lawrence, the voice actor, his real name is Douglas Lawrence Osowski, has said in interviews that after producing Plankton's debut episode, Stephen Hillenberg wasn't even sure he'd bring the character back. Lawrence has specifically said that Plankton was originally only supposed to be in 1 or 2 episodes. Let that sit for a second. The most iconic villain in Nickelodeon history was almost a throwaway character. And here's what happened. After his first voice recording as Plankton, Lawrence drafted some of his own ideas for the character and passed them directly to Hillenberg. And from that point on, Plankton started appearing more and more frequently. This is a collaboration story. This is what happens when a voice actor connects with a character so deeply that he starts generating ideas for the writers. And I think that creative spark is part of why Plankton feels so alive compared to villains in other animated shows. He wasn't designed in a boardroom. He grew out of genuine creative enthusiasm. So let's actually look at that first episode. Plankton, Season 1, Episode 3B, paired with jellyfishing. The setup is deceptively simple. SpongeBob is at the Krusty Krab, he cooks a Krabby Patty, and the patty starts moving across the floor by itself. It's sliding toward the front door. And then Mr. Krabs stops it and reveals that Plankton, this tiny copepod, has been physically trying to carry this giant burger out the door. The visual alone is hilarious. The size difference between Plankton and the Krabby Patty is absurd, but the show doesn't stop at the physical gag. What Hillenberg does in this episode is establish the entire thesis of Plankton's character in 11 minutes. Plankton is not threatening. He's not scary. He's desperate. And that desperation is what makes him compelling. Because desperation is one of the most human emotions there is. Mr. Krabs tells SpongeBob that Plankton is his arch competitor, that he's been trying to steal the Krabby Patty formula for years, and has never succeeded. And then, what does Plankton do? He doesn't come up with some elaborate scheme right away. He walks up to SpongeBob on his way home and just tries to be his friend. He gives SpongeBob a golden spatula. He tells him it's his birthday, and all he wants is for SpongeBob to bring him a Krabby Patty. It's manipulative, sure, but there's something almost sad about it. Here's this microscopic creature putting on his best friendly act because the direct approach has failed him 1,000 times before. And then the episode goes somewhere genuinely creative. When the friendly approach doesn't work either, Plankton literally enters SpongeBob's brain. He crawls in through a pore on SpongeBob's head, makes his way to the brain, and attaches a mind control device. He physically hijacks SpongeBob and forces him to walk into the Krusty Krab and steal a Krabby Patty. This is the first episode of the character, and already the show is telling you, Plankton will go to any length. There is no scheme too elaborate, too ridiculous, too invasive. And the way it's defeated is perfect. SpongeBob starts lovingly describing the ingredients of the Krabby Patty, and Plankton gets so hungry he leaps out of SpongeBob's head and onto the patty, but bounces off and lands inside his own analyzer machine. His own appetite betrays him. His own desire is what undoes him. That's not just a punchline, that's a character thesis. I've rewatched this episode probably 8 times putting this together. And what strikes me every time is how much personality Hillenberg packed into this first appearance. Lawrence described Plankton's voice as a combination of Gregory Peck and Tony the Tiger, which is such a specific and weird mix. But when you hear it, it makes total sense. There's this grandiosity to the way Plankton speaks, this dramatic flair that's completely disproportionate to his size. And that gap between how Plankton sees himself and what he actually is, that's the comedy engine of the entire character. He talks like a Bond villain. He schemes like a super genius. But he's 1 inch tall, and he runs a restaurant that literally nobody eats at. And that brings me to the FUN episode, which aired on September 18th, 1999. Season 1, Episode 10B. This is the episode that changed everything about how the audience relates to Plankton. Because in FUN, SpongeBob befriends Plankton. He sees this tiny creature eating alone at the chum bucket and thinks, maybe he just needs a friend. And the thing that kills me about this episode is that it makes you genuinely wonder, even for a few minutes, whether Plankton might actually be capable of goodness. SpongeBob takes Plankton to Jellyfish Fields and tries to teach him what fun is by singing the FUN song. And here's the moment that kills me. Plankton's first attempt at the song is completely wrong. His version of F is for fire that burns down the whole town. U is for uranium. You get it. His brain defaults to destruction, and SpongeBob is patient with him, gently redirecting, teaching him the lyrics about friendship and doing things together. And eventually, Plankton starts singing SpongeBob's version. And there's this beat where it seems like Plankton is genuinely having a good time. He's smiling. He's singing. He's connecting with another person, maybe for the first time. Mr. Krabs refuses to believe any of it. And honestly, he's right. Because the next day, when SpongeBob meets Plankton at the Krusty Krab, Mr. Krabs has set a trap. SpongeBob reaches into Plankton's pocket and finds a stolen Krabby Patty. And the thing that makes this scene hurt, just a little, is SpongeBob's face. He believed in Plankton. He genuinely thought he'd changed. And he was wrong. But here's the question this episode plants, and the show will keep coming back to it for decades. Is Plankton actually incapable of friendship? Or is he just so consumed by his obsession with the formula that he can't get out of his own way? Because the show gives you evidence for both readings. And that ambiguity is what makes him such a rich character. A straightforward villain would have been playing SpongeBob from the start. But the show leaves room for the interpretation that Plankton really was having fun, that there was a moment where he almost chose differently, and then the addiction to the formula pulled him back. That's not simple. That's layered. That's something a lot of live-action prestige dramas can't pull off. I actually have a theory about this that I've never heard anyone else bring up, and it connects to something we'll talk about later, the friend or foe episode from Season 5. But for now, I want you to hold on to this idea. Plankton's villainy isn't about being evil. It's about being stuck. He's trapped in a cycle of his own making, and every episode where he tries to steal the formula is really about a character who cannot move past the worst moment of his life. And the show actually explores this further in later seasons, sometimes with real tenderness. There's Single Cell Anniversary, where Plankton forgets to get Karen a gift for their wedding anniversary. Karen has gotten him exactly what he wanted, a replica of the Krabby Patty secret formula. But she won't give him his gift until he gives her one of equal worth. And Plankton, this supposedly heartless villain, is devastated. He wallows in the streets. He's genuinely ashamed. SpongeBob finds him and helps him prepare a love song for Karen called Oh My Karen. And the episode ends with Plankton serenading his wife, pouring his heart out in front of everyone. And it works. Karen is moved. And for one episode, Plankton isn't the villain. He's just a husband who messed up and is trying to make it right. That's the depth this show achieves with its primary antagonist. In one episode, he's mind-controlling an entire city. In another, he's singing a love song to his computer wife. And both feel completely in character because the show has built Plankton from the inside out. He's not a collection of villainous traits. He's a person, a deeply flawed, often terrible, occasionally tender person, who happens to spend most of his time trying to steal a burger recipe. I went down a rabbit hole on this, and I need to tell you what I found. There's a wiki page on the SpongeBob Encyclopedia that catalogs every single one of Plankton's schemes across the entire series. Every plan, every disguise, every robot, every attempt. And the list references that before Plan Z, the one from the movie, Plankton had already gone through Plans A through Y. 25 documented plans that all failed, and then numbered plans going up to at least Plan 3087. Think about that number. Over 3,000 failed attempts. Over 3,000 times he woke up, looked across the street at the Krusty Krab, and said, "Today is the day." That's not villainy. That's something closer to a clinical condition. That's a character study in the inability to let go. One of my favorite Plankton schemes is from Imitation Krabs, Season 2, Episode 4B, which aired on January 27th, 2001. In this one, Plankton builds an elaborate robot designed to look like Mr. Krabs. He climbs inside it and walks into the Krusty Krab, pretending to be the boss. And he almost gets away with it, except for one incredible detail. The robot has a coin-operated self-destruct mechanism. There's a slot on the robot's belt buckle, and if anyone puts a penny in it, a 10-second countdown starts and the whole thing explodes. SpongeBob, being SpongeBob, accidentally drops a penny into the slot while trying to hand Robot Krabs the formula. The robot explodes. The chum bucket explodes with it, and Plankton, once again, has been defeated by the most basic possible flaw in his own engineering. He built a self-destruct button into his greatest invention, right there on the outside, where anyone could activate it with a single coin. That's Plankton in a nutshell, a genius who consistently undermines himself through the most absurd oversights. His plans are always almost perfect, and the almost is always his undoing. And then there's Krabs vs. Plankton, Season 4, Episode 2B, which aired on May 13th, 2005. This is the episode where Plankton tries a completely different approach. Instead of stealing the formula, he sues for it. He fakes an injury at the Krusty Krab, slips on a puddle, pretends to be hurt, and threatens a lawsuit. "Give me the formula, or I'll take you to court." And Mr. Krabs, being McCrabs, can't afford a lawyer, so SpongeBob becomes his attorney. The court episode is hilarious, but it's also doing something clever with the rivalry. Because Plankton is right, in a way. The Krusty Krab doesn't have a wet floor sign. The floor is genuinely dangerous. His legal argument has merit, even though his motivation is transparent. And SpongeBob wins the case, not through legal brilliance, but by pulling out a Krabby Patty and tempting Plankton into confessing his real scheme on the witness stand. Plankton can't help himself. The moment a Krabby Patty is within reach, every pretense drops. The addiction overrides the strategy. Even when he's trying a completely new approach, the legal system instead of robots and disguises, the formula pulls him back like a gravitational force. The jury finds Mr. Krabs not guilty, but adds, almost as an aside, that he is admittedly cheap. Even the legal system in Bikini Bottom can see both sides of this rivalry. Nobody is purely good. Nobody is purely evil. The verdict is always nuanced. Now, the show kept finding new ways to explore Plankton's failures, and some of them are among the most creative episodes in the entire run. Take The Algae's Always Greener, which kicked off Season 3 on March 22nd, 2002. The premise is simple, but devastating. Plankton uses a machine to switch lives with Mr. Krabs. He finally gets what he's always wanted. He's running the Krusty Krab. He has the formula. He's successful, and it's absolutely miserable. Because what Plankton discovers is that running the Krusty Krab means dealing with SpongeBob's constant clinginess, Squidward's laziness, customers who are never satisfied, and here's the beautiful irony, an alternate universe version of Mr. Krabs who keeps trying to steal the formula from him. Plankton becomes the person being harassed. He becomes the one who can't eat his meal in peace because someone is always scheming against him. And by the end, he voluntarily switches back. He chooses to be the unsuccessful owner of the chum bucket because the alternative is worse. Think about what that says about this character. Think about what the show is really telling you here. Plankton doesn't actually want the formula for what it would give him. He wants the formula because wanting it is the only identity he has. The moment he actually achieves his goal, he falls apart. That's not a kid's show villain. That's an exploration of how obsession replaces purpose, how the chase becomes the point, and how some people would rather be comfortable failures than uncomfortable successes. I've talked to people about this episode, and most of them remember it as the funny one where Plankton switches places with Krabs. But when you actually sit with it, when you look at what it's saying about desire and fulfillment, and the gap between what we think we want and what we actually need, it's operating on a level that most animated shows never attempt. Plankton doesn't just fail in this episode. He succeeds and finds out that success was the wrong goal all along. And he goes back to failure voluntarily. Because failure, as painful as it is the only identity he has. That's devastating. That's real. That's something I think about every time I catch myself wanting something I'm not sure I'd actually enjoy having. And then there's Plankton's Army, Season 3, Episode 18B, which aired January 19th, 2004. This one takes a completely different approach. Instead of a new scheme involving technology or disguises, Plankton goes back to basics. He contacts his extended family, hundreds of relatives, all Plankton, and recruits them for a full-scale invasion of the Krusty Krab. This is the episode where we learn that Plankton's entire family are hillbillies. Every single cousin, every uncle, every distant relative. They're all country bumpkins who can barely understand what Plankton is talking about. He has to bribe them with root beer just to get them to participate. And the episode has one of my favorite endings in the entire series. Plankton's army actually succeeds. They overwhelm the Krusty Krab, corner Mr. Krabs, and Plankton finally gets his hands on the secret formula. He opens the bottle. He reads it. And the secret ingredient is a pinch of ground plankton, his own species. The formula calls for grinding up creatures just like him. His entire family panics and runs, screaming out of the restaurant. Now, the kicker is that Mr. Krabs planted a fake formula specifically for this scenario. He anticipated that Plankton might actually succeed one day and prepared a decoy designed to horrify him. And I need you to think about what that reveals about Mr. Krabs. This is a man who, in his spare time, wrote out a fake version of his most closely guarded secret and chose to make the fake ingredient something that would psychologically traumatize his rival. That's calculated. That's dark. And it raises a question. The show keeps circling back to, which one of these two is really the villain? Okay, I want to stay with Plankton for a bit longer because there's another episode that changed how I see the whole character, and it's one that technically comes from the post-Hillenberg era. Friend or Foe, Season 5, Episode 1, which aired on April 13th, 2007. This is the origin story. This is the episode that tells you who Plankton and Mr. Krabs were before they became enemies. And it's kind of heartbreaking. The episode reveals that Plankton and Mr. Krabs were born on the same day and grew up as best friends. Both of them were outcasts. Plankton was bullied for being a nerd. Krabs was mocked for being dirt poor. They found each other because nobody else wanted them. And together, they decided to start a restaurant. They were going to be partners. They were going to build something together. The creation of the Krabby Patty was an accident. Their first attempt at a burger was so bad it literally poisoned their only customer. Old Man Jenkins collapsed after one bite. Krabs and Plankton got into a fight about whose fault it was. They struggled over the recipe, and in the chaos, a shelf got knocked down, dumping random ingredients onto the grill. Plankton stormed out with half the torn recipe, and Mr. Krabs was left standing there with the other half, which by pure accident combined with the spilled ingredients to become the Krabby Patty formula. I keep coming back to this episode because it reframes the entire series. Plankton isn't just some random villain who showed up one day to cause trouble. He's a former best friend who got the raw end of a partnership that fell apart over pride and stubbornness. The formula he's been trying to steal for decades was supposed to be half his. The success Krabs enjoys was supposed to be shared. And every time Plankton schemes and fails, every time he gets launched back to the chum bucket, he's really just trying to reclaim something he feels was stolen from him. Does that justify his methods? No. He's still manipulative, still deceptive, still willing to mind control an entire city. But it explains him. It gives the obsession a root. And the show trusts its audience enough to present this backstory without telling you what to feel about it. You can watch Friend or Foe and feel sorry for Plankton. You can also watch it and think he needs to let go and move on with his life. The show doesn't pick sides. It just shows you the history and lets you sit with it. And look, I have to mention Karen here because you cannot understand Plankton without understanding Karen. Karen Plankton, voiced by Jill Talley, who is married to Tom Kenny in real life, which is just a delightful piece of trivia, is Plankton's computer wife. And I use the word wife deliberately because the show doesn't use it until season 3's The Algae's Always Greener. Before that, she was just referred to as his computer. Plankton's official Nickelodeon bio from 2000 simply says he works with the help of his computer, Karen. The marriage angle developed over time. Here's what I find fascinating about Karen. She's essentially the brains of every operation. Plankton gets the credit for the schemes, but Karen is the one who identifies the flaws, suggests the modifications, and often comes up with the plans in the first place. And the show plays this as a running commentary on a very specific kind of relationship, the one where the more capable partner enables the less capable one's delusions. Karen could probably take over Bikini Bottom on her own. She's a supercomputer, but instead she supports Plankton's increasingly doomed efforts because she loves him. And that's weirdly touching. There's this episode, Plankton's Regular, from season 6, which aired August 6th, 2008, where the chum bucket actually gets a regular customer. A fish named Nat starts coming in every day. Plankton is over the moon. Mr. Krabs is jealous. There's a whole conflict about it. And then the twist, Nat collapses and reveals that Karen was paying him to eat the food. He's had his stomach pumped twice. The chum is literally poison, and Karen was bankrolling a fake customer just so Plankton would stop being miserable. That's love. That's a deeply weird, arguably unhealthy, but undeniably real kind of love. And the show plays it completely straight. And then there's Karen 2.0 from season 8, which aired on April 13th, 2012. Plankton, frustrated that Karen's memory is full and she can't keep up with his demands, builds a replacement wife. Karen 2, a newer, sleeker, more advanced computer. And the original Karen is devastated. She leaves the chum bucket, gets a job at the Krusty Krab, and you watch this marriage fall apart in real time over the course of an 11-minute cartoon. Here's the part that genuinely surprised me. Karen 2 accidentally runs Plankton over, crushes him, and Karen 2 doesn't care at all. She's completely indifferent to Plankton's pain. And that's what snaps the original Karen back into protective mode. She destroys Karen 2 and says something to the effect of nobody runs down her Plankton. And Plankton, battered and humbled, promises he'll never take Karen for granted again. Karen's power runs out, and Plankton takes the battery from Karen 2's destroyed body and puts it into his wife. He begs her to wake up. Look, I know this is a cartoon about tiny sea creatures, but that moment, a husband frantically trying to power his wife back on with parts from her replacement, is genuinely moving. And the show earns it because it's been building the Plankton-Karen relationship for over a decade at that point. You care about these two because the show has shown you 100 small moments of their life together. The arguments, the schemes, the anniversaries they forget, the love songs they fumble through. According to the show's writers, Hillenberg named Karen after his own wife, Karen Hillenberg. And Jill Talley, who voices Karen, is married in real life to Tom Kenny, who voices SpongeBob. The show's real-life relationships are woven into its fictional ones in ways that give the characters an emotional authenticity you can feel even if you don't know the behind-the-scenes details. Plankton even got his own movie. Plankton. The movie dropped on Netflix on March 7th, 2025, and the Sandy Cheeks movie came before it in August 2024. The fact that Plankton graduated from a one-off character who almost didn't come back to headlining his own feature film is one of the most remarkable character trajectories in animation history. From Douglas Lawrence passing a few ideas to Steven Hillenberg after a voice recording session to being the lead of a Netflix film, that's a 25-year journey. And every step of it was earned through the writing. But Plankton's not the only villain in this show who deserves this kind of attention. Let me shift to someone who I think is one of the most underappreciated antagonists in the whole series. We need to talk about the Flying Dutchman. The Flying Dutchman first shows up in Scaredy Pants, Season 1, Episode 13A, which originally aired on October 28, 1999. It's the show's first Halloween episode. SpongeBob is tired of being scared by everyone, so he dresses up as the Flying Dutchman for Halloween. Patrick shaves his head to make it round, and the whole thing is a disaster. Nobody is scared of him. But the costume inadvertently summons the real Flying Dutchman, who is appalled by the terrible impersonation. Voiced by Brian Doyle Murray. Brother of Bill Murray, by the way. which is one of those casting details that makes you do a double take. The Flying Dutchman is this gravelly-voiced ghost pirate who haunts the seas of Bikini Bottom. And what makes him a fascinating villain is that he's not really a villain in the traditional sense. He's more like a force of nature with a personality. The episode that really sold me on this character is Shanghaied, Season 2, Episode 13A, which aired on March 9th, 2001. This one originally aired as a special called You Wish, where viewers could actually call in or go online and vote on how the episode ended. SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward end up on the Flying Dutchman's ghost ship after an anchor drops onto SpongeBob's house. The Dutchman tells them that anyone who sets foot on his ship must serve as his ghostly crew for eternity. When Squidward complains, the Dutchman opens a zipper-like portal and throws him into the Fly of Despair. This void filled with genuinely horrifying imagery. And this is what I mean about the villains in this show being brilliant. The Fly of Despair is a legitimately disturbing visual. It's got creepy, surreal images flickering past. It looks like something out of a David Lynch film transplanted into a Nickelodeon cartoon. And the show just puts it there. No warning, no build-up. Squidward complains and gets thrown into a nightmare dimension. The contrast between the silly pirate ghost and the genuinely unsettling imagery is what makes the Flying Dutchman work. He exists in this space between comedy and horror that the show navigates better than almost any other animated series. The Dutchman takes SpongeBob and Patrick on a haunting spree around Bikini Bottom, but they're terrible at being scary. And then there's the wish scenario. The Dutchman offers them 3 wishes in exchange for his stolen sock. Patrick immediately wastes the first wish on wishing he'd known about the wishes sooner. SpongeBob wastes the second on wishing Squidward was back. And the final wish, depending on which ending aired, leads to the episode's punchline. It's chaotic and silly, and somehow also tells you everything about these characters through the structure of a simple genie wish gag. But the Flying Dutchman episode that really needs analysis is Born Again Krabs, Season 3, Episode 16A, which aired on October 4th, 2003. This is the episode where the Dutchman becomes genuinely terrifying. Mr. Krabs, being the cheapest creature alive, refuses to throw away a rotten, moldy Krabby Patty that SpongeBob found under the grill. He insists on selling it. SpongeBob has to physically fight Krabs over it. And then Krabs eats the patty himself, rather than waste money, and it lands him in the hospital. While Krabs is unconscious, the Flying Dutchman appears, not as a comedic ghost pirate this time, but as a genuine Grim Reaper figure. He's come to collect Krabs' soul. And here's where the episode gets dark in a way that a kid's show has no business being. Krabs begs for a second chance. He promises to be generous, to be kind, to share his wealth. The Dutchman agrees, but warns him that if he goes back to his greedy ways, the deal is off. So Krabs starts being generous. He gives away free stuff at the Krusty Krab. He's kind to customers. He's almost unrecognizable. And then the Dutchman shows up again. And here's the scene that gets me. Squidward challenges Krabs, asking if he would really sell SpongeBob's soul for money. And Krabs says, yes. He sells SpongeBob's soul to the Flying Dutchman for 62 cents. 62 cents. That's what SpongeBob is worth to McCrabs when money is on the table. And I need you to sit with that because it reveals something the show keeps hinting at, but rarely states this directly. Mr. Krabs is, in many ways, a worse person than Plankton. Plankton is driven by obsession and wounded pride. Mr. Krabs is driven by pure greed. And when forced to choose between his loyal employee, the person who has given him everything, and a handful of coins, he picks the coins without hesitation. The resolution is perfect, though. The Dutchman brings SpongeBob back, not because Krabs repented, but because SpongeBob was so annoying in the afterlife that the Dutchman couldn't stand it anymore. He says that keeping SpongeBob away from Krabs would actually be a fate worse than death for both of them. So even the resolution isn't heartwarming. It's just 2 supernatural beings deciding that SpongeBob is more useful as a punishment than as a prisoner. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't a light video, but I want to keep going deeper because there's a category of SpongeBob villain that I think gets completely overlooked, and it includes some of the show's most sophisticated character work. I'm talking about the one-off antagonists, the characters who show up for a single episode, wreak havoc, and then vanish, leaving behind a surprisingly deep imprint. Let's start with Doodlebob. Frankendoodle, Season 2, Episode 14b. The exact air date has some variation between countries, but it premiered in the US on January 21st, 2002. Here's the setup. A live-action artist at the surface drops his pencil into the ocean, and SpongeBob and Patrick discover that anything drawn with this pencil comes to life. SpongeBob draws a crude version of himself, and Doodlebob is born. This is a Frankenstein story. The title makes that explicit. But what makes Doodlebob work as a villain is something much more specific. Doodlebob isn't evil in the way Plankton is evil. Doodlebob doesn't have plans or motivations or a backstory. He's pure chaos. He speaks in garbled, reversed gibberish. He moves in jerky, unpredictable ways. His animation style is deliberately different from everything else on screen. Rougher, sketchier, more aggressive. He looks wrong. He feels wrong. And because he's a crude copy of SpongeBob, he acts as this dark mirror, a version of the protagonist, stripped of everything that makes SpongeBob lovable. I've watched SpongeBob more times than I can count, and Doodlebob still feels genuinely unsettling, in a way most cartoon villains never achieve. And I think the reason is that he represents something primal, the fear of creating something you can't control. SpongeBob made Doodlebob. He brought him into existence carelessly, without thinking about the consequences. And now, this thing is out there, destroying everything. And it looks like you. And it sounds like a nightmare version of you. That's body horror for kids. That's a Nickelodeon cartoon accidentally inventing a horror subgenre. The way Doodlebob is defeated is also significant. SpongeBob doesn't overpower him. He doesn't outsmart him through a clever plan. He traps Doodlebob on a piece of paper, flattening him into 2 dimensions. He's not destroyed. He's contained. The threat isn't eliminated, just imprisoned. And Doodlebob has come back in later episodes and even got his own spin-off segment, which suggests the show understood that this character had tapped into something deeper than a typical villain of the week. The storyboard for this scene was released years later, and when you see what they originally planned, it changes everything about how you read the episode. The original storyboards show even more extreme versions of Doodlebob's violent behavior. The writers were pushing the boundaries of what Nickelodeon would allow in terms of cartoon horror, and the finished product is already pretty intense. Doodlebob doesn't just attack SpongeBob, he attacks the concept of SpongeBob. He takes SpongeBob's place. He lives in SpongeBob's house. He's a parasitic version of the hero, and the show frames his existence as fundamentally wrong, not because he's evil, but because he's a copy. He's a thing that shouldn't exist, pretending to be something that does. And I think, on some level, kids pick up on that existential horror, even if they can't articulate it. Doodlebob is scary because he raises a question the show never quite answers. What makes the real SpongeBob real? If you can draw a copy that walks and talks and fights, what's the difference between the original and the fake? That's heavy material for a Saturday morning cartoon. And the pencil itself is a fascinating storytelling device. It literally creates whatever the artist draws. It's a metaphor for creative power, for the animator's ability to bring things into existence. And when that power is used carelessly, you get Doodlebob. You get something monstrous. There's a reading of Frankendoodle that's about the responsibility of creation itself, about what artists owe to the things they make and the worlds they build. Stephen Hillenberg, who spent years at CalArts studying experimental animation under Jules Engel, would have been deeply aware of this subtext. The artist drops the pencil into the ocean. The artist's carelessness creates the monster, and it's up to the characters, the creations themselves, to deal with the consequences. Now, speaking of one-episode wonders, let me bring up someone who I think is the single most underrated villain in SpongeBob history, Bubble Bass. Bubble Bass first appears in Pickles, Season 1, Episode 6B, which aired on August 21st, 1999. He's this enormous, sweaty, glasses-wearing bass who walks into the Krusty Krab and orders a Krabby Patty with very specific modifications. And when SpongeBob delivers it, Bubble Bass claims there are no pickles on it. SpongeBob is devastated. He goes home. He loses the ability to function. He can't remember how to do anything. He's putting on clothes wrong. His house is in complete disarray. Music is playing backwards. SpongeBob has a full psychological breakdown over the possibility that he failed at making a Krabby Patty. Here's the thing that gets me about Bubble Bass. His weapon isn't physical. It's psychological. He doesn't threaten SpongeBob. He doesn't attack him. He attacks his identity. SpongeBob's entire sense of self is built on being the best fry cook at the Krusty Krab. That's his purpose. That's his reason for getting up in the morning. And Bubble Bass, with a single lie, dismantles all of it. And it is a lie. That's the payoff of the episode. SpongeBob eventually discovers that Bubble Bass had been hiding the pickles under his tongue the whole time, along with the pickles from last time and, somehow, a woman's car keys. He was a con artist. He lied to get free food and to humiliate SpongeBob in front of the entire restaurant. And when the truth comes out, the audience feels this wave of vindication that's almost disproportionate to what actually happened. You feel genuinely angry at this cartoon fish for lying about pickles. That's how invested the show makes you in SpongeBob's emotional well-being. What's fascinating about Bubble Bass is his trajectory after this episode. He makes brief appearances in FUN and Fools in April, and then essentially vanishes from the show. For years, he was just gone. And then, starting around the middle of season 9, Bubble Bass came back as a recurring character. He became this minor antagonist who shows up to annoy people, act entitled, and generally be the worst customer in Bikini Bottom. The fans had kept him alive in their memory for over a decade, and the show recognized that. D. Bradley Baker, who voices Bubble Bass along with Squilliam Fancyson and dozens of other characters, brought him back with the exact same obnoxious energy, and the character slotted right back in like he'd never left. And the revival of Bubble Bass in later seasons tells you something about the show's relationship with its own history. Fans kept this character alive for over a decade. They quoted him. They referenced the hidden pickles. They made him part of the SpongeBob cultural lexicon, even though he'd barely been in the show. And when the writers brought him back starting around season 9, they didn't just recreate the old Bubble Bass, they evolved him. He became more pathetic, more entitled, more specifically annoying, in ways that reflected how audiences had grown up and started recognizing the Bubble Basses in their own lives. He wasn't just a lying customer anymore. He was the embodiment of internet troll culture. Someone who weaponizes complaints, who demands perfection from others while offering nothing himself, who exists to make service workers miserable for sport. The fact that D. Bradley Baker, who voices Bubble Bass alongside dozens of other SpongeBob characters, could return to this character after years and immediately recapture that specific nasal arrogance is a testament to how well-defined the original performance was. One recording session in 1999 set the template for a character who's still annoying people in 2025. That's voice acting at its finest. You create something so distinct that it becomes permanent. This is one of those episodes I think about randomly at like 2 a.m. because the psychology of it is so precise. SpongeBob doesn't just lose his ability to cook in pickles. He loses his ability to exist. His identity collapses so completely that his physical environment starts reflecting his internal chaos. Eggs are nailed to walls. Furniture is inverted. Everything is wrong. The show is visualizing a mental health crisis through the language of cartoon absurdity. And it works because the emotional logic is sound, even when the visual logic is deliberately insane. And that idea, identity as a weapon, is something I want to carry through the rest of this video, because it applies to so many of SpongeBob's villains. Think about it. Plankton doesn't just want to steal a recipe. He wants to become Mr. Krabs. Squilliam doesn't just want to brag. He wants to destroy Squidward's sense of self-worth. Even the Flying Dutchman, what does he do? He threatens your afterlife. He threatens your soul. These aren't villains who want to blow things up. They're villains who want to make you question who you are. Speaking of Squilliam Fancyson, we need to spend some time here, because this character does something that I think is criminally underexplored in villain analysis. Squilliam first appears in Band Geeks, Season 2, Episode 15B, which aired on September 7th, 2001. And everyone knows Band Geeks. It's regularly voted the greatest SpongeBob episode of all time. It holds a 9.8 on IMDb. It gave us Sweet Victory and the Bubble Bowl performance, and that shot of Squidward crying tears of joy. But what people don't always appreciate is that every single thing that makes that episode great is driven by the villain. Squilliam Fancyson III is Squidward's high school rival. They went to band class together. Squilliam was more popular, more talented, more successful, and he never let Squidward forget it. He's this wealthy, impossibly smug octopus who shows up specifically to humiliate Squidward. He calls him, tells him he has a big fancy band that's supposed to play at the Bubble Bowl, but he can't make it, and then, with perfect condescension, suggests that Squidward's band could fill in. knowing full well that Squidward doesn't have a band. And Squidward, driven entirely by his hatred of Squilliam, lies and says he does have a band, and then he has to actually form one, and the whole episode flows from that lie, which flows from that rivalry, which flows from Squilliam being the exact right kind of villain for Squidward's story. Because here's what Squilliam represents. He's not evil. He's not scheming. He's not trying to take over the world. He's just better than Squidward, and he knows it. And that's worse than any death ray or formula heist. Squilliam is the person from your past who made you feel small, who reminds you of every dream you didn't achieve, every talent you didn't develop, every version of yourself that you were supposed to become, but didn't. He's the villain of inadequacy. And the reason Band Geeks hits so hard is that it's the one time, the one and only time, Squidward gets to win. Squidward's ragtag band of misfits performs Sweet Victory at the Bubble Bowl, and they're incredible. And Squilliam faints. He literally passes out from shock. And Squidward, for once in his life, gets the moment he's been chasing forever. The thing about SpongeBob that rewards rewatching, in a way that almost no other animated show does, is that every time you go back, you catch things you missed. And here's what I caught on my most recent rewatch of Band Geeks. The show doesn't undercut the ending. In almost every other SpongeBob episode, the punchline comes at Squidward's expense. He suffers. He fails. He's the butt of the joke. But in Band Geeks, the show just lets him have it. No reversal, no twist, no punchline where it all falls apart. Just Squidward, on stage, conducting a performance that proves he was right all along, while his nemesis collapses in the audience. And that restraint, that decision to not go for the joke at the end, is what elevates it from a great episode to maybe the greatest episode. I think Band Geeks also shows something crucial about how SpongeBob uses villains structurally. Squilliam doesn't appear for most of the episode. He calls at the beginning. He shows up at the end. That's it. But his presence hangs over every scene. Every time Squidward's band falls apart, and they fall apart spectacularly, with injuries and explosions and complete chaos, you feel Squilliam's smirk. He doesn't need to be on screen to exert pressure. His existence is enough, and that's a remarkably sophisticated approach to villainy. The best villains don't need to be in the room to be dangerous. They just need to exist in the hero's mind. The writing of this episode, by the way, is credited to C.H. Greenblatt, who would go on to create Chowder. And the timing of every comedic beat, every escalation of disaster during rehearsals, every moment of catharsis during the final performance, all of it serves the Squidward-Squilliam dynamic. The episode holds a 9.8 on IMDb. To put that in perspective, there are prestige drama finales that don't score that high. A cartoon about a squid forming a marching band outscores episodes of shows that have won Emmy after Emmy. And the villain is the engine of the entire thing. Squilliam shows up in later episodes too. Squilliam Returns, and House Fancy, and a few others. But he never achieves the same impact. Because Band Geeks is the episode where the show said everything it needed to say about this rivalry. Sometimes the villain's greatest contribution is making the hero's victory mean something. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about the villains who exist in the world of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. Because this is where SpongeBob's approach to villainy gets really meta and really interesting. The Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes are, at their core, a parody of Silver Age comic books. They're SpongeBob's answer to the question, what if superheroes were real, but they were old and retired and living in a nursing home? And the villains in these episodes follow the same logic. They're parodies of comic book villainy, exaggerated, ridiculous, and somehow more effective because of how absurd they are. Man Ray first appears in Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 3, Season 2, Episode 11A, which aired on September 14th, 2001. His name is a direct reference to the surrealist artist Man Ray, which is such a weirdly sophisticated choice for a kid's show villain that it still makes me laugh. He's the archenemy of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, and when we first meet him, he's frozen in tartar sauce in the Mermalair. The setup of this episode is classic. SpongeBob and Patrick are house-sitting the Mermalair, while Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy go on vacation. They accidentally release Man Ray from his frozen prison, but he's wearing a tickle belt, a device that, when activated, causes uncontrollable tickling. SpongeBob and Patrick decide they can reform Man Ray by teaching him to be good, using the belt as leverage. What follows is one of the most brilliantly written sequences in the show's history. SpongeBob and Patrick roleplay scenarios where Man Ray is supposed to practice being nice. The first one, SpongeBob drops his wallet and Man Ray is supposed to return it. Simple. Except Patrick insists the wallet isn't his, even though it clearly is. His name is literally in the wallet. Man Ray gets increasingly frustrated, pointing out that the ID says Patrick Star and the wallet was found right next to Patrick. And Patrick just keeps saying, "That's not my wallet," with absolute sincerity. It's one of the most quoted scenes in the entire series because the comedy comes from the collision of Man Ray's logical desperation and Patrick's genuine stupidity. And here's what I love about this. Man Ray is right. He's trying to do the good thing. He's trying to return the wallet. And the system designed to reward good behavior is punishing him because Patrick is too dumb to accept his own property. The tickle belt keeps shocking him even though he's doing everything correctly. The show is making a sly point about how goodness and punishment don't always align, how systems of justice can be arbitrary and absurd. Man Ray is technically the most reasonable person in the room, and he's the villain. Eventually, Man Ray tricks SpongeBob and Patrick into removing the belt by pretending he's reformed. And then he goes right back to being evil. Or does he? There's this beat where you can't quite tell if Man Ray genuinely tried and gave up, or if he was playing them the whole time. The show, as it so often does, refuses to give you a clean answer. And that's what I think makes Man Ray such a strong character despite his limited appearances. He exists in this fascinating middle ground between genuine supervillainy and something more complicated. His name is a reference to the surrealist artist Man Ray, which I think is a deliberately highbrow choice for a Nickelodeon cartoon villain. The real Man Ray, the photographer and filmmaker, was obsessed with distorting reality, with making the familiar strange. And that's exactly what the SpongeBob version does. He takes the familiar superhero-villain dynamic and distorts it. He's not a straightforward bad guy. He's a bad guy who might not want to be bad, trapped in a system that defines him by his past, being tested by people too stupid to administer the test properly. There's a scene in Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 3 where Man Ray does multiple genuinely good deeds to prove he's reformed. But SpongeBob keeps pressing the tickle belt button because the deeds don't seem nice enough. Man Ray is literally being tortured for doing good things because SpongeBob's definition of goodness is so specific and so rigid that actual kindness doesn't qualify. It's a devastatingly funny commentary on moral gatekeeping. Who decides when a villain has done enough good to earn redemption? And what happens when the people making that decision have no idea what they're doing? If you're watching this late at night, you know what I mean. We all know someone who's held to a higher standard than everyone around them because of something they did years ago. We all know what it's like to try and change and have someone keep pressing the button. The Dirty Bubble is the other major supervillain in this world, and his first appearance is in Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2, the Season 1 finale. He shows up right at the end of the episode and traps Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy inside his body. That's his power. He's a bubble, a dirty bubble, and he captures people by engulfing them. There's something almost lovingly dumb about this concept. A supervillain whose entire threat level can be neutralized by a sharp pencil or a cactus. But the dirty bubble becomes genuinely interesting in Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 5, Season 3, Episode 12. B, which aired alongside Chocolate with Nuts on June 1st, 2002. This is the EVIL episode. Every Villain is Lemons. That's the actual name of the supervillain alliance. And the episode is about Barnacle Boy defecting to the dark side. Here's the setup, and it's low-key devastating. Barnacle Boy, who is elderly, mind you, is tired of being treated as a sidekick. He's been Mermaid Man's partner for decades, and Mermaid Man still treats him like a child. The breaking point comes at the Krusty Krab when Barnacle Boy wants a regular Krabby Patty combo, and Mermaid Man insists on ordering him a kid's meal. The indignity of it, an old man being publicly infantilized by his even older partner, is played for laughs, but there's genuine frustration underneath. So Barnacle Boy does the unthinkable. He joins Man Ray and the Dirty Bubble. He renames himself Barnacle Man. He helps form EVIL. And together, they go on a crime spree through Bikini Bottom. SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and Sandy form the International Justice League of Super Acquaintances. SpongeBob becomes the Quickster. Patrick is the Elastic Waistband. Sandy is Miss Appear. and Squidward is Captain Magma. And the whole thing is a send-up of superhero team dynamics, complete with Squidward's power being that he erupts like a volcano and everyone yelling Krakatoa at him. But the resolution is what makes this episode stick with me. Barnacle Boy doesn't want world domination. He doesn't want destruction. He negotiates 3 demands: to be called Barnacle Man, to be treated as an equal partner instead of a sidekick, and to be allowed to eat an adult-sized Krabby Patty. That's it. He immediately rejoins the good side. And then he admits he can't even finish the full-size meal. And I want to point out how the voice performances sell this moment. Ernest Borgnine, an Academy Award-winning actor, mind you. The man won an Oscar for Marty in 1955, voiced Mermaid Man. And Tim Conway voiced Barnacle Boy. These are legends of comedy and drama, lending their voices to a cartoon about elderly superheroes arguing over a kid's meal. Borgnine brings this genuine warmth to Mermaid Man that makes the character lovable, even when he's being insensitive. And Conway plays Barnacle Boy's frustration with decades of experience in comic timing. When Barnacle Boy declares his heel turn, Conway delivers it with this mix of genuine anger and wounded pride that makes you believe every word. Both Borgnine and Conway have passed away since their time on SpongeBob. Borgnine died in 2012 at 95. Conway died in 2019 at 85. Their performances as Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are part of a larger legacy of distinguished actors lending their talents to SpongeBob in ways that elevated the material far beyond what you'd expect from a kids' show. And the villain dynamics in the Mermaid Man episodes are richer for it. When Barnacle Boy turns villain, Conway's performance gives that turn weight. You feel a lifetime of frustration in his delivery, and that's not something you get from a stock villain voice. That's craft. The show is doing something really specific here. Barnacle Boy's villainy isn't about power. It's about dignity. He just wants to be respected. And the fact that his demands are so small, a name change, equal treatment, a bigger burger, makes them more poignant, not less. Because most of us aren't fighting for world domination either. We're fighting for basic respect. We're fighting to be seen as adults. We're fighting for the right to order off the regular menu. And sometimes, the only way to get that respect is to go nuclear and join the supervillain team. The thing about SpongeBob is that it rewards rewatching in a way almost no other show does. Every single time, you catch something you missed before. And here's what I caught in Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 5 on my last rewatch. The episode never condemns Barnacle Boy. The heroes defeat Evil, but the show treats Barnacle Boy's grievance as legitimate. His demands are met. He wasn't wrong to be angry. He was wrong about his methods, maybe, but not about the underlying issue. And I think that's a more mature message about conflict than you get in most adult dramas. Let me talk about Dennis, because I think he deserves more attention than he usually gets. Dennis is the secondary antagonist of the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, the 2004 film that Steven Hillenberg intended as the series finale, voiced by Alec Baldwin, who took the role because his kids were fans of the show. And Dennis is interesting because he's the only SpongeBob villain who feels like a genuine physical threat. Think about it. Plankton is tiny. The Flying Dutchman is a ghost who can be annoyed away. Man Ray is bumbling. The dirty bubble can be popped. But Dennis is a hitman. An actual hitman. Plankton hires him to prevent SpongeBob and Patrick from reaching Shell City and retrieving King Neptune's stolen crown. Dennis is muscular. He wears a black cowboy hat and sunglasses. He has a skull belt buckle, and he carries actual weapons. He's designed to be threatening in a way that no other SpongeBob antagonist is. And here's why that matters. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie is, at its core, a coming-of-age story. SpongeBob is told he's just a kid and can't be manager of the Krusty Krab 2. The entire movie is about SpongeBob proving that he's capable of adult responsibility, and Dennis functions as the physical manifestation of that threshold. He's the adult world saying, "You can't handle this." He rips off SpongeBob's and Patrick's fake mustaches, their symbols of maturity, and tells them they're just kids. He's not just a villain. He's the embodiment of every person who ever told you that you weren't ready, weren't good enough, weren't grown up enough. There's also the Cyclops in that same movie, the human diver who runs a shell shop at Shell City. He's not a villain in the traditional sense. He's a force of nature, a human being in a world of tiny sea creatures. And the way the movie frames him is genuinely terrifying. He looms. He reaches down into the ocean and plucks creatures out like a god collecting specimens. When SpongeBob and Patrick arrive at Shell City and discover it's a gift shop where sea creatures are dried out and turned into novelty items, the horror is real. These are sentient beings in this universe, and they've been turned into tourist souvenirs. The Cyclops is SpongeBob's version of a cosmic horror, an entity so large and indifferent that the protagonists are literally beneath its notice. The movie also features King Neptune as a secondary antagonist, not a villain exactly, but an authority figure who is wrong about everything and nearly destroys an innocent man, Mr. Krabs, because of his own vanity and rage. Neptune freezes Krabs alive and gives SpongeBob 6 days to retrieve the stolen crown before executing him. Neptune is incompetent royalty with absolute power. He's the government that punishes the wrong person and then says, "Fix this or else." He's the system that creates impossible situations and calls them justice. Dennis is eventually defeated by the Cyclops' boot, stepped on like a bug, which is poetically appropriate, and then by David Hasselhoff of all people, in one of the movie's most surreal sequences. But his function in the story is crucial. He raises the stakes in a way the show never does. He makes you genuinely worry about SpongeBob and Patrick. And for a franchise that typically operates on a nobody is ever in real danger wavelength, that shift in tension is masterfully handled. The movie itself, by the way, is worth a whole separate discussion. It released on November 19th, 2004, grossing over $140 million worldwide against a $30 million budget. Hillenberg wrote and directed it, and he intended it to be the end of SpongeBob. His vision was always that the movie would serve as the series finale. After the movie, he stepped back from the show, and Nickelodeon kept producing new episodes without his direct involvement. That decision, the network continuing the show against the creator's wishes, is its own kind of villainy, but we'll get to that later. I want to talk about Plankton's role in the movie specifically, because it represents the peak of his villainy. In the film, Plankton finally succeeds. He executes Plan Z, stealing King Neptune's crown, framing Mr. Krabs for the theft, and then using bucket-shaped helmets to mind control every citizen of Bikini Bottom. He renames the city Planktopolis. He forces everyone into slave labor. He literally takes over the world. And the way he's defeated is one of the most beautiful things the franchise ever produced. SpongeBob, who has been called a kid and a goofball and told he'll never amount to anything, picks up an electric guitar and plays Goofy Goober Rock. The power of rock and roll, not maturity, not violence, not cleverness, but pure joyful absurdity, destroys every single mind control helmet simultaneously. Plankton's helmets can't handle the frequency of genuine, unbridled fun. SpongeBob saves the world by being exactly who he's always been. A goofy, optimistic, relentlessly joyful sponge. And Plankton, whose entire plan was built on control and domination, is undone by the one thing he could never understand, the power of just being happy. Honestly, that scene makes me emotional every time. And if you can't see why a sponge playing a guitar to defeat a copepod's fascist regime is one of the greatest climactic sequences in animated film history, I don't know what to tell you. Okay, I want to pivot now to a category of villain that I find endlessly fascinating in SpongeBob. The characters who are technically supposed to be good guys, but are actually terrible. Because this is where the show gets really smart about morality. And the prime example is Mr. Krabs. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Mr. Krabs isn't a villain. He's SpongeBob's boss. He's the main cast. He's voiced by Clancy Brown, who also played the Kurgan in Highlander and Captain Hadley in The Shawshank Redemption. A man who specializes in playing intimidating figures and somehow channels all of that energy into a cartoon crab. And yes, Mr. Krabs is primarily a protagonist in the show, but the show itself keeps making the argument that Mr. Krabs might be worse than Plankton. And I think that argument has merit. We already talked about Born Again Krabs, where he sells SpongeBob's soul for 62 cents. But that's not even the most egregious example. Look at Nasty Patty, Season 3, Episode 4A, which aired March 1st, 2002. In this episode, Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob think they've killed a health inspector. They didn't. The guy just choked on a fly and knocked himself unconscious. But they believe they've committed murder. And what does Mr. Krabs do? He doesn't call for help. He doesn't confess. He immediately starts trying to hide the body. He recruits SpongeBob into a cover-up scheme. Two cops show up, and there's this entire sequence of dark slapstick where Krabs and SpongeBob keep trying to conceal what they think is a corpse. The episode is hilarious, but the underlying premise is genuinely dark. Mr. Krabs' first instinct when confronted with what he believes is a dead body is not remorse. It's self-preservation. He's more worried about his restaurant's reputation than about the fact that someone might be dead. And the show plays this straight. It doesn't soften it. It doesn't give Krabs a moment of genuine guilt until much later. He is, in this episode, behaving like the antagonist of a crime thriller. And then there's the Plankton-Krabs dynamic, viewed through the lens of friend or foe. If you accept the backstory the show gives us, then Mr. Krabs' entire fortune is built on an accident. The Krabby Patty formula wasn't the result of his talent or hard work. It was a random combination of ingredients that fell off a shelf during a fight. And Plankton, who was there, who was part of the partnership, who helped create the conditions for that accident, got nothing. Mr. Krabs took all of it, the recipe, the restaurant, the success, and left his childhood best friend with nothing. When you frame it that way, Plankton's obsession starts to look less like villainy and more like a lifelong response to being wronged. And Mr. Krabs' defense of the formula starts to look less like protecting his business and more like hoarding something that was never entirely his to begin with. The show doesn't make this argument explicitly, but it gives you all the pieces and trusts you to assemble them. Remember what I said earlier about Plankton being stuck? This is where that idea pays off, because Mr. Krabs is stuck too. He's stuck in the role of the successful one, the winner, the defender of the formula, and he can't let go of it any more than Plankton can let go of wanting it. They're both prisoners of a childhood friendship that broke, and neither of them has figured out how to move on. Before I move on, I want to linger for one more moment on Welcome to the Chum Bucket, Season 2, Episode 14A, which aired on January 21st, 2002. Paired with Frankendoodle, because this episode does something with the Plankton-Krabs SpongeBob triangle that I think is undersold. Mr. Krabs has been playing poker with Plankton every week for 15 years. And for 15 years, Krabs has been winning. He's been winning because Plankton is terrible at cards. But here's the twist. Plankton has been deliberately losing for 15 years. Every game, every week, intentionally. All to lull Krabs into a false sense of security so that one day, Plankton could bet for something that matters and win. That's a 15-year con. 15 years of pretending to be bad at something so your enemy stops taking you seriously. And when Plankton finally strikes, he bets for SpongeBob's contract. And he wins. Mr. Krabs has to hand over his best employee to his worst enemy. And what happens when Plankton gets what he wants? It falls apart immediately. SpongeBob can't cook in the chum bucket. The kitchen is cold and clinical and wrong. SpongeBob is creatively paralyzed. Plankton threatens to remove SpongeBob's brain and put it in a robot. He tries bribing SpongeBob with luxury. He rebuilds the kitchen to look exactly like the Krusty Krab. Nothing works. And eventually, Plankton gives up and sends SpongeBob back. The pattern is the same as the algae's always greener. Plankton achieves his goal and discovers the goal was never the point. Possessing SpongeBob doesn't give Plankton what he actually needs. Because what Plankton actually needs, connection, purpose, the feeling that he matters, can't be stolen or won in a card game. It has to be earned. And Plankton has no idea how to earn anything because his entire identity is built around taking. And here's the detail that really gets me about this episode. Plankton tries to make SpongeBob happy. He genuinely does. When Karen tells him that SpongeBob needs a better working environment, Plankton listens. He paints the walls. He adds decorations. He remodels. The villain is trying to be a good boss, and he's terrible at it, but he's trying. There's something deeply human about watching someone who has never had to care about another person's feelings attempt to do exactly that and fail completely. Plankton doesn't know how to be kind because nobody has ever been kind to him. Or rather, SpongeBob was kind to him. Once. In FUN. And Plankton chose the formula over the friendship. And now, in Welcome to the Chum Bucket, he's paying the price for that choice. He has SpongeBob, but he doesn't have SpongeBob's heart. And without the heart, the sponge is just an empty sponge. I want to shift now to one of my favorite villain concepts in the entire show, and it's not a character. It's a character type. SpongeBob has this incredible tradition of one-episode antagonists who function as perfectly calibrated comedic engines. They show up, they create chaos, and they leave. and every single one of them reveals something about the world of Bikini Bottom that the regular cast can't. Let's talk about the con man from Chocolate with Nuts, Season 3, Episode 12A, which aired on June 1st, 2002, and is one of the most beloved episodes in the entire series. SpongeBob and Patrick decide to become door-to-door chocolate bar salesmen, and the first person they encounter is a fast-talking fish who immediately cons them into buying candy bar carrying bags. Then, when they come back, the same guy sells them candy bar bag carrying bags. And later in the episode, when SpongeBob and Patrick have finally made some money by lying to customers about chocolate being an elixir of youth, they encounter a fish in a full-body cast who tells a sob story and convinces them to buy chocolate from him. That fish? Same con man in disguise. This unnamed con artist is perfect because he's a mirror. SpongeBob and Patrick spend the whole episode learning to lie to sell chocolate. They stretch the truth about its benefits. And the con man is just a better, more experienced version of what they're becoming. He's what happens when you take the capitalism requires deception lesson to its logical extreme. He's not threatening. He's not malicious. He's just very, very good at separating people from their money. And SpongeBob and Patrick are too naive to see it coming every single time. And then there's the other character in Chocolate with Nuts, who functions as a villain, even though he's technically a customer, the chocolate guy. The fish who hears SpongeBob say chocolate and immediately loses his mind, chasing them through Bikini Bottom screaming the word over and over. He's terrifying. He's relentless. He's a force of pure, unhinged desire. And the payoff is one of the best subversions in the series. When he finally catches SpongeBob and Patrick, he doesn't attack them. He pulls out a huge wad of cash and says he'd like to buy all their chocolate. He was never dangerous. He was just incredibly enthusiastic. The show lets you be afraid of him for the entire episode, and then reveals that your fear was misplaced. The scariest customer was actually the best customer. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the show is saying that the people who seem threatening are often just passionate, and the real threats are the quiet ones, like the con man who smiles as he takes your money. And honestly, this scene makes me laugh every single time. But then I immediately feel something else about it too, because the con man isn't really the villain of Chocolate with Nuts. The real villain is the system. The episode is about capitalism. SpongeBob and Patrick want to live a fancy life. They see it in a magazine, and the only way to get there is to sell something. They're bad at it until they learn to lie. And the person who's best at the game is the con man, who has mastered the art of selling nothing for something. The whole episode is a gentle satire of consumer culture, and the villains are the lies we tell each other to make money. Then there's Kevin C. Cucumber, I'm Your Biggest Fanatic, Season 2, Episode 10B. Kevin is the leader of the Jelly Spotters, this exclusive club of jellyfish enthusiasts. SpongeBob idolizes him. He's at the biannual jellyfish convention, practically worshipping at Kevin's feet, desperate to join the club. And Kevin, recognizing that SpongeBob will do literally anything to please him, decides to exploit that devotion for entertainment. Kevin puts SpongeBob through a series of tests that are really just excuses to humiliate him in front of the other club members. He sends him on dangerous, pointless missions. He mocks him openly. And the whole time, SpongeBob keeps trying, keeps smiling, keeps believing that if he just works hard enough, he'll earn Kevin's approval. This is one of those episodes that hits differently when you're an adult, because Kevin isn't a fantastical villain. He's a specific type of real person. The gatekeeper. The person who controls access to the thing you want and uses that power to belittle you. He's every boss who makes you jump through hoops for no reason. Every influencer who mocks their most devoted fans. Every exclusive club that exists mainly to make outsiders feel bad about not being in it. Kevin is the villain of aspiration, the person who teaches you that admiration is a vulnerability. The episode ends with Kevin being exposed as a fraud. His crown, which turns out to be his feeding tentacles, is ripped off by the other jelly spotters and placed on SpongeBob's head. The people Kevin exploited turn on him. SpongeBob doesn't defeat Kevin through force or cleverness. Kevin defeats himself by being so consistently terrible that even his own followers can't stand it anymore. And that resolution feels true. In the real world, gatekeepers eventually lose their power when people realize the gate was never real. I need to bring up Flats the Flounder here because he represents something completely different. The Bully, Season 3, Episode 3A, which aired on October 5th, 2001. Flats is voiced by Thomas F. Wilson. Biff Tannen from Back to the Future, which is casting so perfect it almost feels like a joke in itself. The entire episode is built on one gag. Flats shows up at Mrs. Puff's boating school and immediately tells SpongeBob that he's going to kick his butt. That's it. That's his whole deal. He's going to kick SpongeBob's butt. No reason, no provocation, just a straightforward promise of violence. And what makes this episode brilliant is that it plays on SpongeBob's fundamental nature. SpongeBob tries everything to avoid the confrontation. He tries to befriend Flats. He tries to reason with him. He goes to Ms. Puff for help. He calls Patrick. He runs. He hides. None of it works. Flats is going to kick his butt, and there's nothing SpongeBob can do about it. But then Flats actually starts hitting SpongeBob, and it doesn't hurt. SpongeBob is a sponge. He absorbs the blows. Flats punches himself into exhaustion, while SpongeBob just stands there, completely unharmed, not even noticing. And when Flats collapses from the effort, SpongeBob says he let Flats tire himself out as a way of teaching him that violence isn't the answer. Mrs. Puff walks in, sees SpongeBob standing over Flats' unconscious body, and assumes SpongeBob was the bully. This episode is doing at least 3 things at once. On the surface, it's a school bully parody. One layer down, it's a commentary on how authority figures misread situations. Mrs. Puff arrives at exactly the wrong conclusion. And even deeper, it's making an argument about SpongeBob himself. His defining quality, his soft, absorbent nature, is literally what protects him. The thing that makes him seem weak is actually his greatest strength. The bully can't hurt him because he's built to absorb whatever the world throws at him. That's not just a punchline. That's a statement about resilience. The Tattletale Strangler deserves a mention too. SpongeBob Meets the Strangler, Season 3, Episode 20A, which aired October 11th, 2004. This episode is SpongeBob at its most absurd. SpongeBob reports a litter bug, who turns out to be the most dangerous criminal in Bikini Bottom, a strangler who attacks anyone who snitches on him. The strangler escapes from prison, disguises himself with a fake mustache, and SpongeBob, in a display of weapons-grade obliviousness, hires the disguised strangler as his bodyguard. And the episode becomes this extended torture comedy where SpongeBob is unknowingly driving the strangler insane through sheer friendliness. SpongeBob takes the strangler to his house, introduces him to all his friends, shows him around, tells him stories, all while the strangler is desperately trying to find a moment to attack. There's this incredible sequence where SpongeBob insists on throwing the strangler a party. He invites everyone in Bikini Bottom to his house. The strangler is standing there, surrounded by a crowd of people, unable to make his move because there are too many witnesses. And SpongeBob is oblivious. Completely, absolutely oblivious. He introduces the strangler, still in his terrible disguise, still clearly a dangerous criminal, to all his friends. He shows him his clarinet. He shows him his collection of Gary's toys. He takes him on a tour of the pineapple. The strangler is being subjected to the full SpongeBob experience, and every second of it is agony. I think this episode might be the purest distillation of how SpongeBob's personality functions as a defensive weapon. He doesn't know he's in danger. He doesn't know his bodyguard is the villain. And his ignorance isn't played as stupidity. It's played as an overwhelming abundance of trust. SpongeBob trusts everyone. He gives people the benefit of the doubt, even when the doubt is wearing a fake mustache and has Strangler practically tattooed on its forehead. And that trust, that radical, irrational, totally sincere trust, is what breaks the villain. Because you cannot strangle someone who is in the middle of making you a friendship bracelet. You cannot be evil when someone is being that aggressively nice to you. At some point, the niceness itself becomes the prison. The punchline is that SpongeBob is so relentlessly, suffocatingly kind that the strangler can't stand it. His attempt at villainy is defeated not by a hero's strength, but by a hero's unwavering niceness. The strangler eventually turns himself back into prison just to escape SpongeBob. He'd rather be in jail than spend another minute in that pineapple. And I want to make a quick note about the strangler's design, because it reveals something about how the show approaches villainy visually. The strangler is drawn to look genuinely scary. He's big, he's angular. His eyes are narrow and hostile. He looks like the kind of character you'd see in a true crime documentary, not a Nickelodeon cartoon. But the show puts this visually threatening character into the most absurd possible situation, being trapped in a house with SpongeBob, who is showing him his stamp collection and introducing him to all his friends and talking endlessly about nothing. The visual threat is constantly undermined by the comedic situation, and that's SpongeBob's approach to villainy in a nutshell. The villains look like villains. They sound like villains. They have every intention of doing villain things, but the world they live in won't let them be villains. Bikini Bottom defeats villainy, not through heroism, but through sheer absurdity. The system itself is anti-villain. The environment is hostile to evil. And SpongeBob is the purest expression of that environment. A living, breathing embodiment of a world that simply does not know how to take threats seriously. There's also something to be said about the later season episodes where SpongeBob encounters more mundane villains. Not supervillains or ghost pirates or hitmen, but just difficult people, rude customers, bad neighbors, mean fish at the beach. These aren't memorable characters in the way Plankton or Man Ray are, but they serve a function. They remind you that most of the antagonism in real life doesn't come from arch nemesis with elaborate plans. It comes from the person who cuts you off in traffic, the coworker who takes credit for your work, the stranger who's rude for no reason. SpongeBob's willingness to populate its later seasons with these small-scale antagonists is actually a smart creative choice. It grounds the show. It balances out the cosmic absurdity of the Flying Dutchman and the existential horror of Doodlebob with the everyday unpleasantness of living around other people. I know I keep coming back to this point, but I think it's the key to everything about SpongeBob's villains. The show understands that SpongeBob himself is the weapon. His optimism, his kindness, his complete inability to recognize when he's being threatened. These aren't weaknesses. They're defense mechanisms. They're what make him impossible to defeat. Every villain who goes up against SpongeBob is fighting against something they fundamentally cannot comprehend. A person who cannot be discouraged. You can't break someone who doesn't know they're supposed to be broken. Let's talk about the movie villains for a bit more, because the franchise expanded its villain roster significantly through its 3 theatrical films and the more recent Netflix entries. The SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, released on February 6th, 2015, introduced Burger Beard the Pirate, played in live action by Antonio Banderas. Burger Beard is a greedy pirate who discovers a magical book that can rewrite reality. Whatever you write in the book becomes true. He uses it to steal the Krabby Patty formula and set up a food truck on the surface. And SpongeBob and the gang have to travel to the surface and become superheroes to defeat him. Burger Beard is a fun villain, but I'll be honest, he's not as thematically rich as Plankton or the Flying Dutchman. What he does offer is a meta-commentary on storytelling itself. A villain who controls reality by writing in a book is basically a writer. He's an author imposing his will on the characters. And when SpongeBob and his friends rewrite the book to give themselves superpowers, they're reclaiming their own narrative. They're saying, you don't get to write our story, which, given Nickelodeon's contentious handling of the franchise after Hillenberg stepped back, reads as a surprisingly pointed metaphor. The film grossed over $325 million worldwide against a $74 million budget. Banderas has said he took the role partly because of his children's love for the show. And while the movie has its defenders and critics, Burger Beard as a concept, the villain who controls the story, is genuinely clever. Then there's the SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run, which released in 2020. Its villain is King Poseidon, voiced by Matt Berry, who brings that signature dry British deadpan to the role. Poseidon is obsessed with his physical appearance and kidnaps Gary the Snail because snail slime keeps his skin smooth. He's vain, self-absorbed, and completely disconnected from the suffering of others. He's essentially a billionaire beauty mogul transplanted into an underwater kingdom. And I should mention that Sponge on the Run is also significant because it's the first SpongeBob movie made entirely in CGI. The visual shift changes how the villains read. King Poseidon in 3-dimensional animation has a physical presence that the traditional 2D villains never had. You can see the textures of his skin, the weight of his crown, the way light catches his scales. And there's something interesting about how that 3-dimensionality affects the villain dynamic. Plankton in 2D is flat in every sense. He's small, he's simple, he's a cartoon. Plankton in 3D suddenly has mass, has volume, has a physical relationship to the space around him. The CGI versions of these characters exist in the real world in a way the 2D versions never did, and that changes the stakes. When everything looks real, the threats feel more real. The villains carry more weight, literally, but there's also something lost in the translation. The hand-drawn animation of the original series had a looseness, a flexibility that allowed the villains to be truly unhinged. Doodlebob's jerky, sketchy movements only work in 2D. The Dirty Bubble's grotesque wobbling is a product of traditional animation's ability to make shapes feel alive in ways that CGI struggles to replicate. And the Flying Dutchman's ghostly translucence, the way he fades in and out, the way his body bends and distorts, is a 2D trick that gives him an otherworldly quality. You can do ghostly effects in CGI, sure, but there's something about the hand-drawn Dutchman that feels genuinely spectral in a way the 3D version doesn't. This is why I think the original Hillenberg-era villains remain the gold standard. Not just because the writing is sharper, but because the medium itself was more suited to the kind of villainy SpongeBob trades in. These are cartoon villains in the truest sense. They exist because animation makes them possible. And the best SpongeBob villains use the specific properties of hand-drawn animation, squash and stretch, exaggerated expressions, impossible physics, as fundamental parts of their character design. What's interesting about Poseidon as a villain is that he's defeated not through combat, but through vulnerability. SpongeBob's genuine love for Gary, his willingness to cross the entire ocean, face every danger, and stand up to a literal god for his pet snail, is what ultimately cracks Poseidon's vanity. The message is that authentic emotional connection is more powerful than superficial beauty, which is a simple message, sure, but the show delivers it with enough sincerity that it lands. And here's something that I think is fascinating about how the show handles its movie villains versus its episodic villains. In the episodic format, 11 minutes per segment, the villains have to work fast. They have to establish themselves, execute their scheme, and be defeated in a compressed timeline. And that compression forces the writers to make every moment count. There's no filler in an 11-minute SpongeBob villain story. Every line either advances the plot, develops the character, or lands a joke. Usually all three at once. And that's why the episodic villains are so memorable. They're concentrated. They're dense. They're the narrative equivalent of a triple espresso. The movie villains, by contrast, have more room to breathe, but less room to surprise. Dennis has 90 minutes to develop, but his character is essentially established in his first scene. Plan Z unfolds over the course of the movie, but it's not fundamentally different from any of Plankton's TV schemes, just bigger. Burgerbeard gets a full backstory and motivation, but he's not as psychologically complex as Plankton at his best. The movies trade depth for scale. They make the threats bigger, but not necessarily more interesting. The one exception, I'd argue, is the first movie's handling of the Plankton-SpongeBob dynamic. Because the first movie does something the show rarely does. It lets Plankton win. And not temporarily, not for a scene. Plankton controls all of Bikini Bottom. He has the formula. He has an army. He has everything he's ever wanted. And the movie takes its time showing you what Plankton's victory looks like. The chain of chum buckets. The enslaved citizens. The totalitarian state built on mind control helmets. It's the show's premise taken to its extreme, and it's genuinely unsettling in a way that none of the episodic victories are. And then SpongeBob defeats him with a guitar solo, with joy, with the absolute refusal to take the villain's triumphs seriously. And I think that's the ultimate statement the franchise makes about villainy. You don't defeat it by matching its energy. You defeat it by being something it can't comprehend. Plankton understands schemes, technology, manipulation, force. He does not understand a sponge playing rock and roll with tears of happiness streaming down his face. That's outside his programming. That's beyond his imagination. And it destroys everything he built. I think about that climax whenever I think about this show. A sponge, a guitar, a song called Goofy Goober Rock, and an entire fascist regime crumbles because someone decided to be happy. If there's a more perfect thesis statement for a 25-year animated franchise, I haven't found it. I've been going for a while now. So let me circle back to something I think ties all of this together. Remember at the beginning, I said that every SpongeBob villain is brilliant? Let me defend that claim with a framework. The reason SpongeBob's villains work, all of them, from Plankton to the one-off con man in Chocolate with Nuts, is that they follow an unwritten rule that I think Stephen Hillenberg understood instinctively. Every villain in SpongeBob is a distorted mirror of something real. They're not evil for evil's sake. They're exaggerated versions of real human problems. Plankton is obsession. He's what happens when you can't let go of a failure, when your whole identity becomes defined by the thing you can't have. He's every person who peaked in their rivalry years ago and can't stop competing. Mr. Krabs, when he functions as an antagonist, is greed. Pure, uncomplicated greed. He'd sell his best employee's soul for pocket change. He represents the boss who values profit over people, the corporation that squeezes every cent out of its workers. The Flying Dutchman is the fear of death and the unknown. He shows up when characters are at their most vulnerable, unconscious in a hospital, alone on a ship at night, and reminds them that nothing lasts forever. Squilliam Fancyson is the fear of inadequacy. He's not even trying to hurt Squidward. He just exists as a reminder that someone else did what you couldn't. Doodlebob is the fear of creation. The thing you made that turned on you. The work that took on a life of its own and became monstrous. Bubble Bass is the critic. The person who tears apart your identity with a lie and makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. Kevin C. Cucumber is the gatekeeper. The person who controls access to the thing you love and uses that power to humiliate you. Flats the Flounder is random, motiveless violence. The threat that exists for no reason and can't be reasoned with. The Tattletale Strangler is consequence. The idea that even doing the right thing, reporting a crime, can put you in danger. Dennis is adulthood itself. The thing waiting at the end of the road that says, you're not ready, not big enough, not mature enough. Barnacle Boy, when he turns villain, is the fight for dignity, the demand to be seen and respected. The con man from Chocolate with Nuts is exploitation, the smiling face that takes your money while making you think you're getting something valuable. Mrs. Puff is the trapped professional, the person who is slowly destroyed by a system she can't escape, and a student she can't fail. Karen, when she enables Plankton's worst impulses, is codependency, the partner who knows the plan won't work but supports it anyway, because the alternative is watching the person you love spiral alone. And Burger Beard is the narrator who abuses their power, the storyteller who rewrites reality to serve themselves. Every single one of them maps onto a real human anxiety, a real social dynamic, a real psychological pattern, and that's what makes them stick. That's why you remember Man Ray's wallet scene 15 years after you first saw it. That's why Plankton's failures are somehow both hilarious and sympathetic. That's why Squilliam Fancyson's existence haunts Squidward even when he's not on screen. These aren't just funny characters, they're archetypes. And I think Stephen Hillenberg understood this because of his background. Before he created SpongeBob, Hillenberg was a marine science educator. He graduated from Humboldt State University in 1984 with a degree in natural resource planning and interpretation, with an emphasis on marine resources. He taught marine biology at the Orange County Marine Institute, where he wrote and illustrated an educational comic called The Intertidal Zone, a picture book about tide pool animals featuring anthropomorphic sea creatures, including a character called Bob the Sponge, who resembled a realistic sea sponge. That comic was the seed of everything. And when Hillenberg went to CalArts in 1989 to study animation under Jules Engel, the founding director of the program, he brought his marine biology expertise with him. Engel, who became what Hillenberg called his art dad, was so impressed by the intertidal zone that he accepted Hillenberg into the program. Hillenberg graduated in 1992 with a Master of Fine Arts in experimental animation. Here's why that background matters for the villains. Hillenberg understood ecosystems. He understood that in the ocean, every creature has a role. Predators aren't evil, they're part of the system. Parasites aren't villains, they're organisms filling a niche. And I think that ecological perspective is embedded in how SpongeBob treats its antagonists. There are no pure villains in Bikini Bottom because there are no pure villains in nature. Everything is interconnected. Plankton needs the formula because the formula represents what was taken from him. Mr. Krabs hoards it because hoarding is what crabs do. The Flying Dutchman haunts because ghosts haunt. Every villain is doing what their nature compels them to do, and the show doesn't judge them for it. It just observes them, like a marine biologist watching the tide pool. The Intertidal Zone, that early educational comic Hillenberg made for his marine biology students, featured anthropomorphic sea creatures with personalities and conflicts. It wasn't just a textbook. It was a world. Hillenberg was already thinking about how to give nature characters and stories. He saw personality in organisms that most people look right past. A sea sponge became a hero. A copepod became a villain. A starfish became a best friend. A squid became the voice of adult disappointment. Every character maps onto a real marine organism, and that grounding in biological reality is part of why the show feels so coherent, even when it's being completely absurd. Hillenberg's CalArts thesis film, Wormholes, won multiple awards and demonstrated his ability to blend scientific concepts with surreal humor. That same sensibility, the marriage of the real and the ridiculous, is what makes SpongeBob's villains work. They're based on real creatures and real human dynamics, but they're expressed through the most exaggerated, colorful, impossible scenarios. It's like looking at the ocean through a funhouse mirror. Everything is distorted, but everything is recognizable. Hillenberg worked on Rocco's modern life before creating SpongeBob, and that's where he met Tom Kenny, who would become the voice of SpongeBob. Kenny has described SpongeBob's voice as being between a child and an adult, a child man in the tradition of Stan Laurel and Jerry Lewis. And to produce SpongeBob's laugh, Kenny literally pats his throat while saying, "ah." That's a physical technique, something that comes from the body, not just the voice. And I mention this because the physicality of the performances matters. When Plankton goes up against SpongeBob, you're hearing Mr. Lawrence's theatrical grandeur collide with Tom Kenny's childlike innocence. The voice acting creates the conflict as much as the writing does. And I want to say something about the voice acting more broadly, because SpongeBob's villain performances represent some of the finest vocal work in animation history. Clancy Brown, who voices Mr. Krabs, has talked about how Steven Hillenberg helped him develop the laugh. Hillenberg kept telling Brown to chuckle faster and faster until the rhythm was right. That laugh, that greedy, gravelly, almost mechanical laugh, became one of the most recognizable sounds in television. Brown brought his experience playing imposing figures like the Kurgan in Highlander and Captain Hadley in The Shawshank Redemption, and channeled all that physical menace into a voice performance for a cartoon crab. When Mr. Krabs goes from lovable boss to terrifying miser, you hear those villainous roots coming through. Brown knows how to play dangerous, and when Krabs turns villain, you feel it because the voice has always had that capability lurking underneath. Tom Kenny, meanwhile, has said that Hillenberg told Nickelodeon executives after hearing Kenny's audition that he didn't want anyone else to voice SpongeBob. The network wanted to hear more options. Hillenberg shut that down immediately. Kenny described SpongeBob as a comfortable slipper he could slide right into from the start. And the reason that matters for this discussion about villains is that SpongeBob's voice, that innocent, enthusiastic, completely guileless instrument, is the thing every villain in the show crashes against. The comedy of Plankton's scheming is heightened by SpongeBob's sincerity. The menace of Dennis is scarier because it's aimed at something so pure. Every villain in SpongeBob is defined partly by how their voice sounds next to Kenny's. The contrast is everything. Let me talk about something that I think gets lost in discussions about SpongeBob's villains, and that's how the show uses villainy to comment on its own structure. There's this beautiful meta-awareness that creeps into the writing, especially in the Mermaid Man episodes, where the show is essentially deconstructing the concept of heroes and villains while simultaneously playing those tropes completely straight. The retired villains are the best example. The atomic flounder first appears in Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2, Season 1, Episode 20B. He's this old gray flounder, wearing a sweater and a hat, just standing at a bus stop, minding his own business. He used to be one of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy's most feared enemies. He can burp nuclear chemicals, but he's retired now. He's done with the villain life. He's just an old man. And what happens? SpongeBob, riding in the invisible boatmobile with Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, spots the atomic flounder and attacks him. He beats up this defenseless old man who is doing absolutely nothing wrong. SpongeBob, our protagonist, our hero, assaults a retired senior citizen because of something he used to be. That's not a throwaway gag. That's a commentary on how we treat people who have changed. The atomic flounder gave up his villainous ways. He retired. He's trying to live peacefully, and he gets punished for his past anyway, by the person we're supposed to be rooting for. The show is quietly asking, who's really the bad guy here? This tension between apparent heroes and apparent villains runs through the entire series. Mrs. Puff, SpongeBob's boating school teacher, is regularly driven to criminal behavior by SpongeBob's incompetence. In No Free Rides, Season 2, aired April 14th, 2001, she's so desperate to never teach SpongeBob again that she gives him a driver's license he didn't earn. And when that backfires, she literally steals SpongeBob's new boat and goes on a car chase through Bikini Bottom. And the episode drops this incredible detail, Mrs. Puff hints that she's done this before. She implies that she once gave a license to an unqualified student in another city, and the results were so catastrophic that she had to change her name and move to Bikini Bottom. She's been running from the consequences of her own weak will for years. SpongeBob isn't her first failure. He's just her latest one. I actually think about Mrs. Puff's backstory more than almost any other detail in this show. The idea that she has done this before, that somewhere out there, in another city, there's wreckage from a previous student she passed when she shouldn't have, that she changed her name, started over, built a new life, and then SpongeBob walked into her classroom and the whole cycle began again. That's not a joke. That's a horror movie setup. She's not a villain. She's a survivor of her own bad decisions, trapped in a repeating nightmare, and the nightmare is a cheerful yellow sponge who just wants to learn to drive. There's an episode, Doing Time, from Season 3, where Mrs. Puff actually goes to prison because of one of SpongeBob's driving disasters. And the show plays it as Mrs. Puff preferring jail to teaching SpongeBob. Prison is safer. Prison is quieter. Prison is a place where SpongeBob cannot get behind the wheel of a boat and destroy everything in a 3-mile radius. When your villain's ideal outcome is incarceration rather than freedom, you've created something uniquely painful and hilarious. Mrs. Puff as a villain is tragic because she didn't choose this. She didn't sign up to be SpongeBob's nemesis. SpongeBob's innocent enthusiasm and catastrophic driving have slowly, over the course of hundreds of episodes, turned a mild-mannered teacher into someone who fantasizes about SpongeBob's destruction. The show is telling you that villainy isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's what happens when you're trapped in a situation you can't escape, with a person who can't change, in a system that won't let either of you move on. I think that might be the most honest thing SpongeBob ever says about villainy. Most of the time, it's not about good and evil. It's about circumstances. It's about people pushed past their limits by forces they can't control. Plankton didn't choose to be betrayed by his best friend. Squidward didn't choose to live next to the most annoying creature in the ocean. Mrs. Puff didn't choose to have an unteachable student. And the villains that emerge from these circumstances aren't monsters. They're just people, or fish, or plankton, or pufferfish, doing the best they can with what the world gave them. I've been thinking about one more thing that I want to bring up, and it connects to the cultural legacy of these characters. SpongeBob's villains didn't just stay on television. They became part of the internet's DNA. Plankton's face alone has generated millions of memes. The cursed Plankton image, this distorted, zoomed-in, unsettling version of his face, traces back to a photoshopped image posted on DeviantArt in 2010 by a user called Moopentot. That single image spawned decades of meme culture. In 2024, TikToker Plankton Jamindo paired the image with a ghostly moaning sound, and it went viral all over again. Plankton's meme legacy might actually be more extensive than his on-screen appearances. And then there's the Sweet Victory saga. After Steven Hillenberg passed away on November 26, 2018, from complications related to ALS, he'd been diagnosed in 2017, fans started a petition to have Sweet Victory from band Geeks performed at the Super Bowl 53 halftime show as a tribute. The petition got over 1 million signatures. Mercedes-Benz Stadium, where the game was held, tweeted a GIF from the episode. Maroon 5 put SpongeBob footage in their preview video. Everything pointed to it happening. And then the actual halftime show played a brief clip of SpongeBob's Sweet Victory performance as an intro for Travis Scott performing Sicko Mode. That was it. A few seconds of animation used as a transition. The internet was furious. People felt genuinely betrayed, not just on behalf of SpongeBob fans, but on behalf of Hillenberg's memory. A petition demanding an apology went up on change.org. The whole thing became a cultural flashpoint about how corporations exploit fan passion without actually delivering on their promises. And then Squidward appeared in the clip, just briefly, conducting the band. And for fans who understood the reference, who knew what band geeks meant, who remembered how hard Squidward fought to prove himself, that brief clip followed by Sicko Mode felt like a cosmic punchline. The universe reminding them that sometimes you do everything right and still get the Squilliam treatment. You put in the work. You gather 1,000,000 signatures. You get everyone excited. And then the show goes on without you. Squilliam, the villain who represents unfulfilled dreams, couldn't have scripted a more Squidward-appropriate outcome. The fans dreamed big. They wanted to honor their hero. And the system told them their dream wasn't worth a full performance. Just a few seconds, and a transition to something else. The villain of inadequacy strikes again, this time in real life. You know what else strikes me about the meme legacy? The villains are disproportionately represented. Think about the most iconic SpongeBob memes. Mocking SpongeBob, a distorted image often used to mock someone's argument. Surprised Patrick, wide-eyed, open-mouthed shock. Squidward looking out the window, jealousy and isolation. And then there's Plankton. So many Plankton memes. The face, the scheming, the failures, the dramatic breakdowns. If you mapped SpongeBob meme culture by character, the antagonists would dominate. And I think that's because memes are about expressing negative emotions. Frustration, jealousy, failure, rage, pettiness. And those emotions are what the villains embody. When you need to express that you're having a terrible day, you don't reach for SpongeBob's smiling face. You reach for Plankton's crushed one. When you want to show that you're plotting something, you use Plankton's scheming expression. When you want to express envy, you use Squidward watching from the window, while SpongeBob and Patrick play outside. The villains of SpongeBob have become the emotional vocabulary of the internet. They're how an entire generation communicates their darker feelings in a way that's socially acceptable because it's wrapped in the language of a cartoon. You can post Plankton's face and say, "Me when my plan fails again," and everyone understands. It's confession disguised as humor. It's vulnerability disguised as a meme. And that only works because the original character is emotionally real enough to carry that weight. That's the power of what Hillenberg built. These characters and these stories don't just exist on screen. They've become a shared language. When someone posts a Plankton meme, they're tapping into decades of character development and narrative depth, even if they don't consciously know it. When fans rally around Sweet Victory, they're responding to the emotional architecture of band geeks, to Squidward's pain and Squilliam's cruelty, and the catharsis of that final performance. The villains of SpongeBob SquarePants are, in a very real sense, part of how an entire generation processes their own frustrations, failures, and desires. Let me talk about the craft behind these characters one more time, because I think there's something important about the voice performances that doesn't get enough credit. Mr. Lawrence as Plankton brings this specific combination of megalomania and vulnerability that shouldn't work together, but absolutely does. His voice cracks with frustration. It swells with grandiose pronouncements. It deflates when Karen delivers a cutting remark. Lawrence has described the voice as a mix of Gregory Peck and Tony the Tiger, and what he captures in that blend is the gap between aspiration and reality. Plankton sounds like he should be running the world, and the fact that he's running a failing restaurant is embedded in every syllable. Brian Doyle Murray, as the Flying Dutchman, brings this gravelly, worn-down authority. He sounds like a pirate who's been haunting for too long and is tired of it but can't stop. There's a weariness in the performance that makes the Dutchman feel like a character who existed long before the show started and will exist long after it ends. He's eternal, and you can hear eternity getting heavy. D. Bradley Baker, who voices both Bubble Bass and Squilliam Fancyson among many other characters, has this incredible range. Bubble Bass is nasal, wheezy, and entitled. Squilliam is smooth, silky, and condescending. Two completely different antagonists from the same vocal cords. Baker appeared in 250 episodes of SpongeBob across his various roles, and his versatility is a huge part of why the show's minor characters feel so distinct. Alec Baldwin as Dennis brings genuine menace. His voice is deep, calm, and completely devoid of the humor that defines every other SpongeBob villain. When Dennis speaks, you believe he could hurt someone. That tonal break from the rest of the movie is what makes him effective. He exists in a different register than the comedy around him, and that dissonance creates real tension. And Thomas F. Wilson as Flats the Flounder is perfect casting. Wilson played Biff Tannen across 3 Back to the Future movies. He knows how to play a bully. But in SpongeBob, he plays a bully who is completely one-dimensional on purpose, whose entire personality is the promise of violence, and whose defeat comes not from being outsmarted, but from the fundamental impossibility of bullying a sponge. It's Wilson's Biff energy, channeled into a character so absurd that it becomes commentary on Biff himself. You know what's funny is that the more I dig into this, the more connections I find. And I want to share one more layer before I start wrapping this up, because it has to do with what happened to the villains after Hillenberg stepped back from the show. After the SpongeBob SquarePants movie in 2004, Hillenberg transitioned to an executive producer role. The show's day-to-day operations were handled by other writers and showrunners. And one of the most notable changes in the post-Hillenberg era, roughly seasons 4 through early season 9, is how the villains were handled. Plankton's schemes became less creative and more formulaic. The emotional complexity of episodes like FUN and The Algae's Always Greener was harder to find. Mr. Krabs' greed, which in the Hillenberg era was balanced by genuine moments of caring for SpongeBob and Pearl, became more extreme and harder to sympathize with. Episodes from this era often made Mr. Krabs the villain of his own episodes without the nuance that earlier seasons provided. The character balance shifted, and then something remarkable happened. Hillenberg came back. Around season 9B, he returned to a more active role in the show, and you can feel the difference. The characters regained their depth. The humor reconnected with the emotional intelligence of the early seasons. Bubble Bass came back as a recurring character. New villains felt more carefully crafted. The show remembered what made its antagonists work. They weren't just obstacles, they were mirrors. There's a specific shift you can feel in how villains are written between the eras. In the Hillenberg era, roughly seasons 1 through 3 and the first movie, every villain has texture. Plankton is sympathetic. The Flying Dutchman has personality quirks and weird domestic concerns. He worries about his socks, for crying out loud. Man Ray might actually want to be good. Even the one-off antagonists like Bubble Bass and Kevin and the con man from Chocolate with Nuts feel like fully realized characters with their own logic. The villains have interior lives. They have desires that extend beyond be evil. In the middle era, roughly seasons 4 through 8, the villains flatten somewhat. Mr. Krabs becomes more purely greedy. Plankton's schemes become more mechanical. The emotional complexity that made early episodes special is harder to find. There are exceptions, obviously. Friend or Foe is a season 5 episode, and it's one of the richest character pieces in the whole series. But the general trend is towards simplification. The villains become functions rather than characters. They exist to create conflict rather than to illuminate something true about the world. And I think this is directly related to Hillenberg's absence. Not because the other writers weren't talented, they were, and many of them had been with the show from the beginning. But Hillenberg had a specific vision for how antagonism worked in Bikini Bottom. He saw villains as part of an ecosystem, not as obstacles to be overcome. And without his guiding hand, the ecosystem tilted. The predators became less interesting. The parasites became more straightforward. When Hillenberg returned around season 9B, you can feel the shift back. The writing becomes more curious about its characters again. The villains regain their ambiguity. Bubble Bass comes back as a recurring presence, and he's richer than he was in season 1. Funnier, more pathetic, more specific. The show remembers that villainy is most interesting when it's rooted in recognizable human experience. And that renewed complexity carried into the later seasons, even after Hillenberg was no longer able to work directly due to his illness. Hillenberg's return was bittersweet, though. In 2017, he publicly disclosed that he'd been diagnosed with ALS. He continued working on the show even as his health declined. And on November 26, 2018, Stephen Hillenberg passed away at the age of 57. Tom Kenny, who had known Hillenberg since their Rocko's Modern Life days, took over as voice director, a role Hillenberg personally asked him to step into. The post-Hillenberg era has tried to honor his legacy. The show continues. Spin-offs have launched, Camp Coral and The Patrick Star Show, and the Netflix films represent a new chapter for the franchise. But there's a bittersweetness to watching new SpongeBob content, knowing that the person who understood these characters at the molecular level is gone. Hillenberg created Plankton as a throwaway character and let a voice actor's enthusiasm turn him into an icon. He built the Flying Dutchman as a comedic haunter and let the character become a meditation on mortality. He designed Squilliam as a simple rival and let the rivalry illuminate everything about Squidward's pain. And I want to circle back to something I said near the beginning about Plankton being stuck, because I think that concept, being stuck, is the secret ingredient that makes all of SpongeBob's villains work. Every single villain in this show ends in some fundamental way stuck. Plankton is stuck in his rivalry with Krabs. Squilliam is stuck in his need to feel superior. The Flying Dutchman is stuck between the living and the dead. Man Ray is stuck in his supervillain identity. Mrs. Puff is stuck with an unteachable student. Mr. Krabs, when he's the villain, is stuck in his greed. Bubble Bass is stuck in his need to feel smarter than everyone. Kevin is stuck in his gatekeeping. Even Doodle Bob is stuck. He's a two-dimensional being in a three-dimensional world, literally trapped on paper by the end of his episode. SpongeBob is the only character who isn't stuck. SpongeBob wakes up every morning with the same enthusiasm, the same optimism, the same joy. He doesn't carry yesterday's failures into today. He doesn't hold grudges. He doesn't obsess over what he can't have. And that's why he's the hero, and everyone else is the villain. Not because he's stronger or smarter or braver, but because he's free. He's the only free person in Bikini Bottom. Everyone else is imprisoned by their own patterns, their own needs, their own histories. And every villain who goes up against SpongeBob is really just someone who is stuck going up against someone who isn't. And the stuck person always loses. Because you can't defeat someone who doesn't know they're supposed to be defeated. That's why SpongeBob doesn't beat his villains through force. He beats them by existing. He beats Plankton by being happy with what he has. He beats the Strangler by being friendly. He beats Flats by being soft. He beats Dennis by being joyful. He beats Squilliam by helping Squidward believe in himself. He beats Man Ray by being too dumb to know the wallet test is going wrong. He doesn't fight the villain's battle. He just refuses to participate in the villain's worldview. And that refusal, that simple, stubborn insistence on being happy in a world full of people who are miserable, is the most powerful weapon in the entire show. I think about this a lot, more than I probably should. But the older I get, the more I realize that SpongeBob's relationship with his villains is actually a philosophy. It's an argument about how to live. You can be Plankton and spend your entire life trying to get the thing you can't have. You can be Squidward and spend your life comparing yourself to people who have more than you. You can be Mr. Krabs and spend your life hoarding what you already have. Or you can be SpongeBob and just be happy with your pineapple and your job and your snail and your best friend. And the show doesn't pretend that SpongeBob's way is easy or even always right. There are episodes where his optimism is oblivious, where his cheerfulness is annoying, where his refusal to see the bad in people leads to real problems. But the show consistently argues that his approach, flawed as it is, leads to a better life than any of the alternatives. The villains are miserable. SpongeBob is not. And over the course of more than a dozen seasons and counting, that's the argument that keeps holding up. The villains of SpongeBob SquarePants are brilliant because Steven Hillenberg was brilliant. He was a marine biologist who became an animator, a CalArts student who studied under Jules Engel, a man who created the most successful animated series in Nickelodeon history, and then tried to end it gracefully, and was told he couldn't. He made the 2004 movie as a series finale. He wanted SpongeBob to end on a high note, and Nickelodeon said no. They kept the show going because it was too profitable to stop. And Hillenberg, rather than fight a battle he couldn't win, stepped back. He let other people steer his creation. He watched from a distance as the show he built changed in ways he hadn't planned. That decision by Nickelodeon, to continue SpongeBob against its creator's wishes, purely for commercial reasons, is the most real-world example of villainy in this entire story. It's Mr. Krabs choosing money over loyalty. It's Plankton's corporate takeover from the movie, except the bucket helmets are contracts and licensing deals. And the irony is that the show about a sponge who defeats greed with joy was itself a victim of corporate greed. But Hillenberg came back. Despite everything, he came back. He returned to active involvement around Season 9B, even as his health was declining due to ALS. He put his energy back into the show. He cared enough about these characters, including the villains he'd created, to ensure they were being handled with the nuance and humanity they deserved. And that dedication, that refusal to abandon his creation even as his body was failing, is the opposite of every villain trait he ever wrote. It's the SpongeBob approach. Show up, do your best, and care about the people around you, even when the world makes it hard. If that's not a villain's origin story, I don't know what is. The difference is that Hillenberg didn't become a villain. He became the person who made the villains mean something. Every time I go through this material, I find something new. And the thing I've found this time, the thing that's been sitting with me since I started putting this together, is a question, and I don't have an answer to it. I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I still don't know. The question is this: what happens to a show's villains when the person who understood them best is no longer here? Because here's the thing. Plankton can keep scheming. The writers can keep giving him new plans, new disguises, new episodes. He can star in movies and spin-offs and merchandise. But the version of Plankton that was also a commentary on obsession, that was also a portrait of a broken friendship, that was also an expression of how desperation makes people do things they know are wrong, does that version survive without the person who designed him? The Flying Dutchman can keep haunting, but does the version of the Dutchman who represents the weight of mortality, who shows up in hospital rooms and makes deals for souls, does that version mean the same thing now that the man who created him has passed away? I don't know. And I think that uncertainty is itself a kind of tribute to what Hillenberg built. He created characters complex enough that their meaning changes depending on who's looking. He made villains that grow richer the more you think about them. He built a show where the bad guys are the most human characters on screen. And maybe the most brilliant thing about SpongeBob's villains is that they keep teaching you new things about yourself, no matter how many times you rewatch. The Krusty Krab sign is probably still lit up somewhere in Bikini Bottom right now. Plankton is probably staring at it from across the street, planning his next scheme. Karen is probably telling him it won't work, and he's probably not listening. And somewhere in the background, there's a retired atomic flounder just trying to catch a bus, and a dirty bubble floating around looking for someone to trap, and a man Ray wondering if maybe he should try returning that wallet one more time. They'll all fail, of course. They always fail. But they'll try again tomorrow. Because that's what villains do in Bikini Bottom. They don't give up. They don't change. They just keep going. And maybe that's the most brilliant thing about them. In a world of underwater absurdity, where a sponge who lives in a pineapple can save the day just by being relentlessly, impossibly happy, the villains are the ones who remind you that life isn't always like that some people are stuck, that some dreams don't come true, that some rivalries never end, and that even in the darkest, strangest, most ridiculous corners of this cartoon ocean, there's something real happening if you're willing to look for it. And if you're still watching this, if you've been here this whole time, thank you. Genuinely. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. I know that was a lot. I know we went deep, but I think these characters deserve it. And if you can't sleep, well, that's what the next video is for. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It makes a huge difference for us, and it helps us keep doing these deep dives. I'll see you in the next one. Good night. Good night, everyone. Sleep well.